when we try to design the program, we also think about the religion balance, but we also think about the gender balance. So our discussion will be two women from academia and also the environmental circles in China. The first one will be Professor Beatriz. She is from Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and she has worked for more than 2 decades as a journalist in the international arena. And also she is correspondent for various media in Latin America. So please.
And first of all, I would like to thank you and Kinshi for this invitation for this extraordinary forum. I'm learning a lot from all the colleagues yesterday, now in this session, and I'm very, very proud and very happy to be part of this initiative. Yesterday and today, there is a dialogue which combines many challenges we are facing. And I think that my first thing is that these challenging times call us to think about responsibilities, the responsibilities we have as human beings, particularly human beings who believe that another world is possible. So remembering the slogan of the World Social Forum, we have seen, we have heard from panelists here and not only here, that there is no lack of diagnosis about the impossibility of the capitalist system to give answers to the economic, social, environmental crisis we are facing. And so we are sure that we need the transition. Which kind of transition? We don't know, but we still are convinced that we need to think on a transition to a different system. And we know that this transition is urgent. Many of the colleagues have referred to the urgency because we are in a moment with perhaps some 10 years in front of us, but not much to face the failure of the ecological system in which we live. So we also have heard from the colleagues, and particularly now Vijay has mentioned that this transition is to some form of social organization that we could call socialist, even though we know that there are many ways of understanding socialism, but a kind of social organization which we can call socialist, particularly defining this socialist, future socialist, as a system in which humanity lives in harmony with Mother Earth, yeah, with the environment, with nature. But in this moment, we are in the midst of chaos. And yesterday, our Indonesian colleague mentioned Gramsci's famous phrase, which says that between the old that is dying and the new that is being born, all sorts of monsters emerge. So this period is a very complex period for all of us. And so in this sense, let me make a consideration as journalist. Margaret mentioned that before my academic life, I used to be a journalist and an editor for a long time. So I'm used to watch media coverage carefully, particularly international politics and national, of course. And in these months, with the pandemic, the commercial media relationship of dependence on political and economic powers have become evident, or more evident than ever. Yeah? It has been analyzed this dependence for a long time. Of course, this is nothing new, but nowadays it is quite evident. And it is a moment that media should be discussing alternatives to the imposed model and defining measures to overcome the terrible social inequalities we are facing and all other kind of challenges, environmental challenges. But of course, these issues cannot be part of the media, the mainstream media agenda, because most of them are hand-tied. Either they are committed to the model or they are part of it. So we can't expect a true, free discussion on these challenges on the mainstream media. In one moment, internet and social media was seen as an alternative to that. Perhaps it could be the step we need for a democratic discussion. But we have seen that social medias have been trapped by large for-profit companies or by powerful groups that have enormous resources to impose their point of view, their truth, and their interpretations of the challenges we are facing. In Brazil particularly, we have seen how definitely, how important and decisive was their interference in the last electoral campaign, in the elections. And now we know that one of the President Bolsonaro's son is Steve Bannon's partner in one of those initiatives. So of course we cannot expect an act of repentance, of mea culpa of either of them in relation to the chaos in which we are. So I think one of the main concerns we have to have in this moment, we know that another world is possible, and not only possible but necessary, is to fight for hearts and minds, because the problem is to be able to build this strong international coalition or front of forces to build up the alternatives. And for this, we have to fight for hearts and minds, trying to show our beliefs, our possibility, our strengths to change the present situation. Yeah. And in this scenario, I was delighted to hear the comrades, the colleagues who spoke before, because I think that we have a lot to learn from societies that have been looking for alternatives for a long time, and that not only looking for, but also formulating alternatives or living with the compromise of alternatives. And I can say that the pandemic has shown to all of us that in spite of different affiliations, of different origins, grassroots movements have shown in this last period that it's possible to work together. It's possible to organize collectively on other bases, inverting priorities, decentralizing decisions in the way that our Peruvian colleague was saying, with no hierarchy, no bosses. Actually, we have seen this during this period, that way of reacting in face of the challenges, in face of what the pandemic is creating, and the governments and the state were not able to give to people. In Latin America, we have seen in numerous initiatives, very valuable initiatives, pointing in this direction of a new society, of a dialogue of knowledge, which we can call it. And the grassroots movements have been working in this sense for a long time. And nothing comes from nothing. So an experience is growing and growing in this field. And the grassroots movement are pointing solutions, pointing ways of collective work, collective solutions. And for instance, in relation to a new way of organizing society, there are various analyses coming from these movements, how to manage a transition to post-extractivist models, to abandon monoculture, to ensure food sovereignty, to create energy matrix that are not longer based on fuel, on fossil fuels or carbon, and also matrix organized in a decentralized way outside the impositions of the market. So, but it's not only in Latin America that we are seeing that, in Africa, of course, in Asia too. And in this sense, it's very interesting the intercontinental or transcontinental dialogue among these experiences that is growing. And it's also interesting to see that this dialogue is driven by the new generations, which were born with the idea of a global human civilization. And of course, they are driven also by indigenous and Black people. And a significant detail is that these movements have a majority of women. I think this is very crucial. Women taking part of pioneer initiatives, showing the possibility of another future. Particularly the indigenous people, as has been mentioned by our colleagues from Mexico, from Peru, also Vijay mentioned that in Ecuador, in Bolivia, they have defined Ethiopia as a society of good living, which is particularly important, the consciousness of harmony between human beings and the Pachamama, the Mother Earth. And there is another very interesting concept that I have heard from the Aborigines, the indigenous in Argentina, terricid. That is the definition they use for the present stage of our system, for the extreme destruction of the natural habitat. So this is why they are fighting for a very radical paradigm shift, a new birth, a new learning. And in this context, they have raised a very interesting concept, and they advocate for a new legal definition for the natural habitat, equating it to human beings. I mean, nature as a subject of rights. And in this sense, humans have responsibility in relation to nature. That's a concept that has been raised by these communities. So I think it is not by chance that the new paradigms are being proposed by the indigenous populations. It's not absolutely by chance, because they were decimated by the genocide caused by colonialism, imperialism, neocolonialism, and they are convinced of their resilience, of their strengths. They have been resisting for centuries. So it's not by chance. But it's very interesting. Some intellectuals have been talking about the necessity of a new enlightenment. And I personally, I think it can't be a new enlightenment, because if we think on the enlightenment, of the legacy of what we call enlightenment, it has everything to do with what was denounced by our comrade, our colleague Jorge, of the science as a tool of war. This rationality of what the legacy of enlightenment has bring science to be the science of war. I agree completely, fully. And not only that, also the Eurocentrism, the white supremacists, everything is in some way related to the legacy of enlightenment. So we can't think on a new enlightenment to be the path for a new future. I think that we have to think a very interesting situation we are facing in this moment, and this that this new era, this new paradigm is being conceived, proposed, but those who were called by Frantz Fanon the wretched of the earth, those who suffered violence for centuries and dispossession, but they are aware of the resilience. Their all wisdom is illuminating the birth of this new era. And I think that we have to think that this birth of the new era allows us, even though we have huge challenges, to not to be trapped by that affirmative, there is no alternative. Of course, there is alternative, and we have to work on what I think our strategic goal of formulating a correct narrative to be the one who enters in, who confronts the ideas that are being defended by the extremists, the right-wing extremists, as the way to overcome the challenges of the present. We have to try to give the first step of our challenge to a new era, this battle in the minds, in the ideological way of understanding the moment we are living in. I think that was, I could comment on what I have heard yesterday and today, the brilliant interventions of all our colleagues who are with us thinking of a possible new future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Beatriz. Yeah, and you try to stress the important role of women leadership in the continuous struggle. And you also stress the very important, how can we make use of the indigenous wisdom, and also to let us be prepared for a new to challenge or to facing a new era, and also to try to theorize our struggle and to provide a alternative narrative to theorize our struggle. So the next speaker will be Yongchen 老师, and she is the senior environment reporter for China National Radio, and she founds a Green Earth Volunteers, a kind of Chinese environmental NGO since 1996.
非常感谢邀请我来做这一节的评论。其实我对这个题目的回应就是非常深刻的感慨，就是什么是正义。
Very thought about what is justice. China in the south now is suffering from the flood. Behind this, there are lots of stories that we build a lot of dams and reservoirs. At times like this, it is a big impact on the lives of common people in China. I wanted to hear more about OHASHI. He mentioned about after the nuclear pollution, how Fukushima and how in Japan it is still like nuclear power is still used. we consider it to a common people, they consider it as a clean energy. But then for this clean energy, we also paid the price of justice, at the price of justice. Vijay mentioned that in America, so in the 50% of population in America, of the whole world, they wasted, like they contributed like almost half of the waste of whole world. So when it comes to the technology, now in these times of phase of humanity, what function it is playing? Let's go back to the so-called green energy. There is a challenge that we face, which is about justice. The technology that we are talking about, we think maybe the technology can save us. But after what I thought is the Mexican expert, she said, now this technology is actually harming nature. It's harming the indigenous people. It's mentioned by Jorge ISHIZAWA. In my organization, the Green Earth, lots of the members come from lots of different medium in China. In 2006 and 2010, we initiated several activities, which is like a march from the perspective of journalists to understand the situation of China's the water situation. In China, we have to talk with the government and authorities, but actually what was affected most is the common people. They don't have the chance to speak or to carry out the dialogue with one word. So when I was in those march, those investigations, although the government spent lots to restore for the conservation of the water of the river, and the government also grouped the residents instead of letting them to go roaming around, and the government gave money to them so they can keep together. Some people think, well, that is like retirement. Some people think that they cannot find a place their own in this earth. From the perspective of the justice of climate, what do they want? What do they, and they don't have the right to speak out. When I was in an international forum, the representative from China, they always have a lengthy report. But when it comes to the river, we call China, we have to think about what is suffering China in this climate change. I know lots of people, lots of audience has lots can speak fluent English. They can, but they have never been in the place in the river to carry out an investigation. So when I was in Yangtze River and Yellow Rivers, I realized that when I had a chance to speak in the international society, I have to describe what's their life like. That is my responsibility. So earlier, when I heard about the nuclear pollution or in Mexico, what is taught as knowledge, and also what Vijay described about the green economy, the so-called economy, the price, who is paying for it? So I think it is always the common people who is really under the effect of the climate change. They don't have the right to speak out. Their life was not described. This pandemic, I live 3 hours away from Beijing. I planted 70,000 trees with my brother. So during this 1 month and a half, I stayed with the village children. They don't have phones. They might have phones, they might have TVs. We managed to restore, to clean a river. And when they had a good time, the river was really touched. At the time, so the experts from the social studies. So we need this kind of theoretic link. We also need this kind of understanding. I don't know about the children who is in the background of the OHASHI, who I think is he is like, she is asking, is that a photo or is it real background? The children behind OHASHI. So I think in this South Forum, we need to think, how can we really make an impact to the reality? I know that Ms. Kimchi and Professor Kimchi is helping the farmers in Shanxi province who sell the products from the village to improve their livelihood. And I also heard the stories from the youngsters who in rural area of China. I think in this flood, under the influence of the flood in the south of China, we need to discuss the justice and also to describe about the justice, which really requires us to have one more layer of thoughts. That how can we? I know that after learning from the Kerala in India in 2006, I joined the trip of investigation in Kerala with Kimchi and Margaret. The library, the village library, I think. So it really touched me. So I donated all my books to the library, village library. I was surprised that some of them like to read the books of poems. I think the chance that they got to read books like this is very limited. So now you can see some photos of the children that in the village area, we have less and less chance to make a dialogue with the foreign organizations, because just like I mentioned before, lots of the members are from media. They also work in media. So we published lots of books, and using the money that we sold from the books, we managed to build lots of library in the village. And we also made a documentary that is about the investigation of the rivers. When we screened the documentary, we managed to sell some of these books and to get the fund for the kids. You can see how happy they are, the face, the children's face when they got the books. So I think every time I would just keep selling more books so that the kids got a chance. So the theoretic study of all the experts that I just heard, I still think is important, but I still think we need to take the action and really make a change. What is so-called green hydropower? What is the real green power? We really need to have something real. In face of the flood, we cannot just try to rescue from it, but starting from the beginning, that from the rivers planning and really to prevent it from happening again. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay, and then next we'll open the floor, and so you can raise your questions, and after that we will ask the speaker to respond.
Hello, Jorge. In the Chinese group, they are discussing the concepts that you proposed, the federarchy, and then also your discussions about reciprocity. So could you elaborate a little bit more on this?
Yes, I read a comment saying that the notion of federarchy would be more appropriate, perhaps. But the idea of federarchy is still anthropocentric, while this heterarchy I'm talking about, which is not so developed, is actually, I found a short paper, a very old short paper by one of the beginners of the cybernetics movement, Warren McCulloch. This concept. This was later elaborated by a group in Germany that goes by the name of Vordenker. Vordenker with a V, Vordenker point DE. That's their site. And the cybernetician is a logician actually called Gotthard Günther. And they have developed this idea of the hierarchy. And in our exploration of the concept, we are thinking of two in dialogue, but taking into account a third one. A third is included. And there is no relationship like in we say in a community of in dialogue who are equivalent, say. They are always involved in dialogue, but taking into account a third that can intervene anytime, you see. This is the notion of hierarchy. So if you can say of the relationship between three, that's more or less the idea. A obeys or dictates, B obeys, but C dictates to A, you see? Sort of, say, in a society, the president conducts a government with ministers, and you go down the way through a hierarchy, and this the last post that you can see in government dictates to the citizen, but you make this recursion and have the citizen mandating the president. So that's the way of imagining also a relationship between two who are partners, but that make partner, say, in our case, talking about ecology, we have Mother Earth as the third included in the dialogue. And this relationship is very interesting because no matter how many are included, you can always take one a whole set of the ones who are not A or B. The C is composed of infinitely other participants, say. That's more or less what I have understood of this concept. And I feel that it's great because you, even in socialism, you don't have that, you see. And that's the relationship we have to with nature, you see. And actually, COVID-19, which is part of nature, It's not our enemy, actually, in this, in this notion of hierarchy. Even though we can put it in terms of an enemy that is very powerful, we are not servants. We are not victims of this person, say. We can dialogue and learn from everyone, you see. That's more or less a bad application of the concept. I don't know if that's, that was more or less understood. I have to think that through a lot, actually, but I see, I have the experience of following the relations within the indigenous with natural elements. There is a relationship of equivalence. That's the reason I identify this as a relationship in which no one is less. No one is less in the world. No, it's no, we are all equal, as in democracy. It's not. No one is less. There are degrees of being, yeah, more or less, I don't know, but no one is less.
Okay, Gilberto, you want to respond?
The Zapatistas are telling us since many years ago, about 10 years ago, that we are living a crisis, multifactorial crisis that could lead the humanity to the collapse, to the total collapse, not only of the human species, but also of all forms of life in the planet. So if we take into consideration this perspective, the question is not only what Rosa Luxemburgo pointed out in the past, that barbarian or socialist, but life or death. That is the only question that we have today, especially with the pandemic. We have a situation that show all the multifactorial crisis, production, ecological, humanitarian, violence, everything is involved and interrelated. So what I pointed out in my paper is first that we are in a collapse, all this due to the capitalist system. Two, that since this is a cause in March, we don't have a decision, but only that we are for the life and for the death. And third, that of all the social sectors, collective sectors, the Zapatista movement particularly demonstrates that the collective wave of building democracy from below, from the bottom, is the only form of reaffirm a change in the world. As a matter of fact, in the collapse, those societies who are organized in the auto-sustainability are the ones who have more probabilities of life, of future. So the Zapatistas teach us that organizing for themselves without with a horizontal democracy is the way of responding to this crisis, to this multifactorial crisis.
Beatriz, you want to raise question again, or are you
yeah,
satisfied?
I think we have a lot of possibilities with our colleagues to think about the transition in which we are in some way. Yeah, but for me, the problem is how to address the conscience of our colleagues. In Brazil, we are facing this problem. Because, for instance, I agree with Jorge, the problem of science, yeah? Science as a tool to war. But on the other hand, in this moment in Brazil, for instance, if we question science, we are going to favor those most reactionary, most extremely right-wing that are denouncing science in a very different perspective. So it's not easy to address this problem, you see. And we have this amount of fake news and disinformation campaigns. So I think from our experience in Latin America, and particularly in Brazil, in which we have a population which is so creative, so who loves life and joy, and so. But in this moment, they are captured by hatred, by this seed of division which was put in our societies. And it's very challenging for me to think how to address the problem of taking conscience of our strengths, of our possibility of changing this situation, because we are the majority. We have the possibility, but we are facing this very severe strategic problem. Communication, information, and education are keys for this moment, I think. I know Vijay's work, for instance, with the Tricontinental Institute, I think is a very key way of addressing these challenges in this moment, to study, because they have think tanks, they have a lot of resources in their hands to design the strategies to address the more reactionary way of understanding the challenges we are facing, just for a minority. So we have to think about this: education, information, communication, and the building in Samir's way of understanding this international alliance of progressive and indigenous social black movements and social movements and progressive forces and environmental militants. And so, well, I'm just talking about I think which is my, in this moment, what personally I am trying to think about and to have some possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. And Vijay?
Yes, you know, it's very nice to be here with you. I just wanted to put some shape on the comments that I'd made, because they, as Beatriz says, they come out of our collective project. You know, when in the 1990s, Fidel Castro went to Venezuela and gave a very important speech about the battle of ideas. And he articulated this thought that, you know, this is a debate, not an ontological debate about the nature of reality, but it's a debate about power and how imperialism is trying to shape not only world institutions, but also consciousness, how we think about what is needed, aspirations and so on, you know, so that people in very cold countries live inside houses which they heat, and then inside the hot house they have a refrigerator which they keep cold, and inside the refrigerator which they keep cold they have an even colder place called a freezer. And because you don't want the freezer to get too cold, you have a heating coil to prevent it from over freezing. I mean, it's a mad idea of civilization. Why not just keep your things in a cold box outside in the cold? You know, instead you build these boxes upon boxes. And you know, Castro warned that this is not a question of ontology. This is a question of politics, and here imperialism plays a role. And unfortunately, in the last 35, 40 years, the conceptual apparatus that was there with somebody like Fidel has withered away, you know, so that it feels uncomfortable for people in academic forums and other places when you use a term like imperialism. You know, people think you're anachronistic or you're insane. I mean, let me just give you some statistics just to bear this out. In the United States, for instance, per capita energy use is 9,000 kilowatts per capita. 9,000 kilowatts per capita in the United States. In continental Africa, the average is 625 kilowatts. In India, the average is 755 kilowatts. Now we're comparing 755 kilowatts per capita of an Indian, which I know is class ridden, and there are caste implications, so that some people have 200 kilowatt use, even lower, others have high. But just to look at the per capita, you're talking about 9,000 kilowatts used in one country and 625 kilowatts used on a continent. And yet the United States government torpedoes the Paris agreement on climate. You know, it's not torpedoing this because Trump is insane, or, you know, or Obama actually walks into the room in Copenhagen and yells at the developing nations and says that, you know, your formula about differential treatment is totally inadequate to the modern world. Why is it inadequate to the modern world? Why can't we still argue for differential you know, treatment and so on? Why can't we still make the claim about, let's call it a green reparations? You know, why can't these things be on the table? Because they have very cleverly and almost in a protracted sense delegitimized the epistemology that includes concepts like imperialism. So you can't even think it because as you say it to others, it appears that you're being naive, anachronistic, and so on. So that once you remove concepts like imperialism from the conversation, then you have a flat world discussion where you start talking ontologically about the status of science or the nature of climate or how to save the planet. I'm afraid I'm not interested in these liberal approaches of how to save the planet. Let's talk about what's destroying the planet in the first place, and that's a differential question. That's not a human problem. You know, Anthropomorphine, you know, humans are destroying the planet. I don't think so. I think that is a way to camouflage precisely the power interests that are actually destroying the planet and then trying to absolve themselves by blaming everybody or saying that China is the biggest emitter. Let's look at per capita usage of energy. It shows you a different, you know, problem. So I would say that exactly as Beatriz is saying, this is a battle of ideas, friends. It's a battle of power over epistemology. And, you know, there has been a concerted attempt to delegitimize a way of seeing the world that to my mind is far more accurate than the kind of fashionable language about anthropomorphine and that humans are doing this and so on. That is the delusions of liberalism that is preventing us to come to the heart of the matter, which is an imperialist organization of the world and its resources, and the putting of the onus on the transition on people who are least benefiting from the world as it stands today.
Okay, thank you, Vijay. And then maybe Masaaki and also John also can give your responses. Maybe Masaaki first.
It was quite nice that, like Vijay pointed out, you know, our green ideas or renewable energy has, you know, very dangerous part, and without realization of those things, as he rightly mentioned, that we were destroying in one hand, and especially in the third world, and we just try to save our first world only. So this is really good starting position, opportunity for me. to think about more deeply. But anyhow, the Fukushima issue is also probably, I believe, that's a common question to everybody. How to deal with nuclear power is even economic system change. Still, any economy needs energy, and how we should deal with this energy probably remain as one of the biggest toughest point. Thank you very much.
Okay, and John.
Yes, thank you all very much. I'm going to also agree and affirm what Beatriz has spoken about, fighting for hearts and minds, and what Vijay has said about a battle of ideas. Personally, from where I sit, I don't think that we need more analysis of the crises. I think we need to talk a lot more about movements and alternatives and how to connect them. And what I see is that the pandemic is actually nourishing these conversations, just like Trump's election in the US in 2016 has led to an astonishing array of new social movements and alliances. And this I find to be true worldwide as well, among activists and radical academics. I think that this is the moment for revolutions, or at the very least, building momentum for many revolutions and movements for radical social change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all panelists. And now, time's up. We are closing our sections. But in the afternoon, we have another section with the same theme, ecological justice through socialist transformation, or eco-socialist for transformation. And also in the evening in Hong Kong time, we also have the dialogue between the Gustavo Esteva and also the Cyanide, because they will talk about indigenous in Mexico and also India. So you are welcome to join. And also we organize an e-lecture by John Pedro Sadil to talk about the global peasant movement on 17th of July. And then we'll provide the interpretation between Spanish and English, and also Spanish and Putonghua. So we are all welcome. So now, thank you very much, and bye-bye. See you soon. Yeah, bye-bye.